All right, earnings season is underway, and we are. I'm expecting earnings seasons to come in really well. The goal is like 3.5%, and I think we'll beat that. I think we'll be closer to 5, 6. But I wanted to just show you one of my edges, and the workbook that I use for my earnings plays is right here. You guys, I've given you access to this. And this is me. This is the page. All plays is where I keep track of all the plays. Can you guys see that bottom? Let's see. There we go. So right here is all plays. Okay. So we come in here and we can see what's happening today, tomorrow, in a week or two, or whatever. Well, the one that I played today was TSM. Now, when you look at TSM, one of the things you're going to notice is it usually gaps up. And so I was looking at TSM and I was like, I'm going to wait. I'm going to see what happens, and then I'm going to play it after. And so this becomes an after move, meaning earnings are already out. I've got the details. And so what I do here is I've got TSM, and I come over here and I look at, this is usually what happens, and what I'm looking at is what's called open to low, which means on the day of earnings, TSM is going to open at whatever number it is, and then on average, it's going to drop 2%, right? Well, what I want to see is, what about the days that it actually gaps down, right? Well, if you look at this one, right? This is one that it gapped down on. That's what opening gap means. It gapped down. Well, we went 1% lower. Okay. Well, what about the next one? Well, about 1% as well. What about the next one? Wow, that one's 3%. Well, when was that? Well, that was July 2021, bear market, blah, blah, blah. Okay. So for me, I'm looking at this and I'm thinking, all right, it's probably going to pull back between 1 and 2%. That would be my guess, before we get a little bounce, right? Does anybody have any questions on how I came up with that number? Right? I'm going back, looking at historical data. I'm putting it in, et cetera, et cetera. So the next thing that I do is I'm like, all right, I come over here in my home tab and I put in TSM right here. You can see on line 40 here. Can you guys read that? If you can't see it, let me know. And what I do is I come over here to my P, Q, and R columns, and I'll put in the open price. Now, what is the open price? Well, you just go to TSM and you look at where it opened today. Well, you can see it opened at 132.65. So as soon as that happens, as soon as the open happens, I'm like, all right, let's find an area where I feel comfortable absorbing. So I put in 132.65. I wanted to absorb around 1.5%, right? So what number would that be? Well, it's 130.53. Okay. So I've done the historical data, I've done the drift data, and it's like, all right, well, now I need to come back and look at volume profile and see if it matches up with anything. Right? So we're simply using a multiple edges or multiple ideas to create this edge. So when you go back and you look, there's nothing down here. So where do you have to go back to? Well, you got to go all the way back down to these guys, right? So if you're looking at these guys, they're the ones that are going to catch you, right? So let's dig into these guys and figure out where the absorption areas should be. So all we do is we literally zoom in to this area, right? And as you zoom into the area, I'm going to create a volume area high, a volume area low, and a point of control. And you can see, whoops, This is what I came up with. This is what I was comfortable with. So my idea was, all right, let's line these up and see where that comes into the 1% mode. Well, the 1% mode was 130, 50-ish, right? The 1.5. So I was like, all right, so I want to pick it up around 130, 50-ish. Is there any VP to support that area? And the answer is yes. And so now you can see the goal for me, you know, how I draw the boxes, is to absorb in here. This is where I want to absorb TSM. And so what I do is I set up a trade to absorb in that area. Okay. Is there any question on how I came up with the VPs, how I came up with the numbers, how I came up with the drift, or anything like that? Drift just means where it moves from open to close on earnings day. Okay, so what I did here was I said, all right, this is where I feel comfortable buying. Now, where do I want to sell? Right, where's that sell level? So you guys know me, I always want to keep smaller pieces and scalp and do all that kind of stuff and kind of get a good cost basis. But the overall goal for me was about 4%, right? So around 138. That's the overall goal, right? So is that doable? Well, what does that equal? That's up here around gap close, right? Yeah, I could see that. I could see we could get up to 138. So my ultimate target's up here near this gap close on TSM. So what I do is I'll buy shorter dated options or shares. And when I say shorter dated, it's all relative for me. I'm not talking about lottos. So what I did was I went in and said, hey, let me find a relatively cheap option. And I went with the May 17th 150 calls, right? And so what I'm doing with these calls is I'm saying, look, I'm going to try to get 50 to 100% out of these calls, and that's going to help lower my cost basis. And then I'll be able to take the shares to 138. Okay. So is there any questions? So once we came into this buy zone, I was buying the shares in those calls, right? The goal here is to be able to use those calls so I don't have to scalp the shares. And, you know, I've already taken off some of those options at, you know, 105. I took 30 off at 105. I took like 70 off at 120, you know. And so what I've done is I'm getting, you know, between 50 and 100% on these options. And what it's going to ultimately allow me to do is that cost basis is down here now, right? And so if for whatever reason the market rolls over, TSM rolls over, I can still, it's up to me to decide this, I can still say, do I want to absorb TSM for an even longer term play, or am I just going to play this as an earnings play? I can do this because I'm a profitable trader and I can mix boxes. If you're not profitable, I would not mix any boxes. Just do your normal plan. Here, I'm going to go through it real quick again. So I have multiple edges on earnings that I can play. I have what's called run into, right? Day of, after, volatility squeezes, all that stuff. Now, within the day of, you've got your earnings move, your open gap, and your drift. All drift is what the stock does from open to close. Does it go up? Does it go down? And so TSM came out, and they actually had pretty good numbers, and the stock's gapping down. okay, so this may be a buy opportunity. Let me go in here and look and see the last few times the stock has gapped down. Well, it happened on July 20th and it happened on October 13th, right? 2022 and 2023. Now, I took this one out because it was a more of a bear market type territory, so I wasn't paying attention to this one. But I looked at these and it was 1%. It was like, all right, 1% is where it's going to, it will probably definitely pull 1%. And so what I do is I got to figure out what does that 1% equal. For me, I wanted it a little bit lower. I said 1.5, and then I came to my home tab. I clicked on home tab. I typed in TSM, and I went to PQ and R cells up here, which is actual open to high, open to low. And I put in the price it opened at, where I wanted to start picking it up, 130.50s. Right? Around that level is where I wanted to start picking it up. And then I said, is there any VP to support this? Well, yes, there is. This is the next buy zone down here between 126 and 130, right? So for me, the top side of this value area high is 130.85. Okay, well, let's look and see how this all equals out to percentages. Well, open print price is this blue line right here, so it's 132.65. If I were to pull it back to the top of that 130.85 area, well, what is that? Wow, that's 1%. That's exactly what the stock's supposed to pull to. You know what I mean? It's like, oh, wow, lines up perfectly. I'm definitely a buyer up here at this 130.85 level. And I will buy down to this 128.88 level if, by chance, the stock goes down a couple percentage points, right? So for me, as soon as we start coming into the levels, I start buying, right? And now my goal for today is to buy and sell or scalp out, which I call dig in the trench, enough money to have shares that I've bought after I take off the profits that have a cost basis somewhere around this level. That way, if I stop out, it's going to be a small loss, right? If for whatever reason TSM comes over, breaks down, and I have to stop out, the overall trade for me for a longer term trade will be a small loss if I decide to do that. The other option is I've already locked in the money. You know, I'm going to keep everything at entry, and no matter what, I've made profit, right? Now, the goal side of it, the profit target side of it, I actually wanted to get a pretty big win. You know, you could go for a 3% win. You know, that's fair. But I wanted a bigger one. And so I put in 4.5%. Well, why? The same idea. Went back and looked at these and said, well, where can we rally to, right? Well, you can see one of them rallied 12%. Crazy, right? So the other one only rallied 2.5%. So I'm like, all right, let's go for 4%, 4.5%. Well, what does that equal? Let's go back to the chart, and it's 138.62. 139 area is gap close. So if I can bring this back up to here, I've got my 4.5%. Boom, check, got it, right? And that's how you do day of trades when it comes to drifting. Right? This is the drift. All we're playing is the drift here. So this edge is earnings after the data's already came out. You're playing the drift. So you find the numbers that the drift equals out to being for the historical data. You find the VP. You set up the risk reward. You set up the profit targets. You make the plays. All right? So does this make sense?